Hello, everyone. Glad to be here today with Ron and John. We're going to be actually discussing Microgiant's expert topic in innovation. My name is Edgar Martin. I'm gonna help pretty much go through these questions that we have for two experts to help us kind of navigate through today's environment when it comes down to business, especially when it comes to innovation. And so some of the questions that we have hopefully will help some of the small business out there with finding ways to navigate through today's market. One of the things who I wanted to introduce today, starting with, is John Mills. John, welcome.
Thank you for being here, and it's fun to be in a group to talk about some of these things that come ever so naturally for some of us and with training for others.
And then we have also Ron Burgess.
Happy to be here.
John, I do have some interesting facts about you, your history and business and your experience. First of all, we cannot deny the accent. So that's a New Zealand accent. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. From down under, the real down under.
Yeah.
And there's a few things that I want to see highlight on this when it comes to your background is in electronics, especially in audio engineering and computers. And also a few things about John is you started multiple companies. When you moved to the United States, you also have an extensive history of some companies that you started, and looks like mostly it's been focused in the technology realm. Some of those is CB World, and then I saw as well some awesome other endeavors that you had, like with EMC.
EMCI, yeah.
Can you tell us just real briefly what CB World was and what EMC?
Yeah, actually, CB World was in New Zealand, and it was Citizens Band radio was really getting to be pretty big in the 80s, well, actually in the 70s, and so I had dabbled a little bit with publishing a newspaper and worked as an editor for a pretty large newspaper, and because of my electronics background, was aware that it was a very good trend for communications and information infrastructure that was not being met easily by the existing entity. So decided to make a magazine, a monthly magazine for CB World. And the fun thing with this was we kind of thought that people would be interested in it. We went out and sampled a few, and they said, yep, that would be good. So I had been working previously in import-export, working for a company that did import-export of electronics. So I knew a lot of the main manufacturers who were significant in the arena. I wrote them all letters and said, look, we're coming out with a publication 4 months from now. Here's what it's going to look like. And we've got some advertisement opportunities, front pages, like $400, etc. We ended up pre-selling the first publication before it was even made. It was profitable on day one. And, we never thought it would be as successful as it was. And it was incredible. Then we just invited people to write articles. And so we had white paper and experts writing articles on various crystal sets and frequencies and how you can use it in the farming industry or aeronautics. And it was great, a lot of fun.
Awesome. And you mentioned also when you moved to the United States, you guys started Interwoven Inc. in 1995.
Well, let me talk about EMCI. First of all, I dropped out of college in the 20s. I was doing pure math and applied physics, and I just got really bored with what I was learning. And I thought, I'd rather go out in the real world. So that's why I left college. So when I came over to the United States and I had a good background in electronics, I couldn't get a position with anybody because I didn't have a bachelor's degree. They wouldn't even interview me. One of my mates interviewed for Texas Instruments and got a job as a sales engineer. I actually had more knowledge than he did, and they wouldn't even talk to me. So I formed my own company, EMCI, and we were basically a sales engineering agency for high-tech electronics. And we took off and we grew. Back in the day, I had a partner with me at the first couple of years, bought him out after year 3. And we grew to 7 or 8 people, covered 5 states, and ended up being agents for AMD and for Micron and for Qualcomm. And it was actually a really fun time. I loved the business. And what was interesting is I ended up hiring a lot of people with degrees, bachelor's and master's degree. I still didn't have one. Nobody ever asked me. And I was going to tell them that, no, I didn't have one. But I have plenty of people who do. So it was out of necessity that in America, because I didn't have a bachelor's degree, I wasn't going to get interviewed. So I just started my own company. It was a lot of fun.
Is that what moved you? You mentioned that's kind of what moved you into the field of technology.
Yeah. So over the period of the 80s to the 90s, we were basically technology traveling salespeople. We had all of this high tech knowledge, and we knew what AMD and Micron and Qualcomm were coming out with, the new products, and we would help design them into some of the systems that we now take for granted, like the Dish TV network that we helped design the Qualcomm chipset into that. So what happened is over time, the internet started coming in, and the value of somebody coming in with a big bag of information and handouts, and we would meet with the engineers and they'd tell us what their design needs were, and we would collaborate with them. That actually for a while disappeared because the internet kind of snuck in on the back end, and now you can search the internet and find out what you want. And to some extent, I saw that as being a problem for the value of the consultative engineering person. I made a decision. I said, let's go do something else.
And and I have some after retirement stuff that you have as well here. Before we go there real quick, I maybe wanted to get some insight on the professions from Ron Burgess as well too during the professional time, and then maybe talk about you guys profession and then how we went into why we're here today. Ron, can you tell us a little bit more about your profession as well too? You've been a consultant for a long time. You've been a business owner of multiple retail stores and specialized typically in marketing. What is your biggest takeaway when it comes down to your profession, when it comes to being a consultant and also being a business owner?
The biggest takeaway, it was really hard to get started, that's for sure, in terms of consulting, because nobody really believes that you know what you know until you can kind of demonstrate that. And so that was an interesting problem. It really did help, I think, being in the consulting business, because I already had started a couple, three businesses before I got into consulting, and I subsequently started two or three other businesses that I wasn't necessarily directly involved in each case. But the consulting side of it was pretty interesting, I think, just because I just desired to share what all the mistakes that I had made in business. Fortunately, I had a great mentor when I was in college. I decided that I was going to switch from pre-med into business, and I just felt like a duck out of water. Didn't know anything about business at all. So I thought, well, the thing to do is to get involved in business, and I did that. And I worked there for 4.5 or 5 years while I was finishing up college. I had a wonderful set of two mentors, a senior and a junior. One of them was about 40, 45, and the other one was in his 70s, I suppose. The older one had an immense amount of experience going all the way back to pre-World War II, in the war years, of course. And the younger one, while he was old enough to have been in the war, he really had his experience sort of trying to make a living, and eventually got into the retail business and just kind of bouncing around trying to figure out what to do. It turned out he was pretty good in the fashion business, particularly in shoes. So he had started a shoe store. And so it was that store that I ended up learning the business. And in those days, everything was really sort of manual. So the senior told me and taught me how to do all of the numbers. And junior taught me how to do all the creative stuff. And so it was really a perfect team for me to learn. And they gave me an opportunity to go into business, and that's really how I got there. It's like, what am I going to do? Now I'm going to go look for a job. And I did a little teeny bit of that, but ultimately, I come to realize that, when somebody offers you an opportunity to get into business, and, you can invest a certain amount of money and they invest the rest of the money, and it's like, wow, I'm only young once, I'll give it a shot now. I'm not going to be able to try it later. And it worked great. We didn't know it at the time, but we were at a kind of a crossroads in in the business. It was back during the late 60s, early 70s when war protesting was going on. Dress had changed quite a bit, not so much from what it is today, jeans and t-shirts and a little bit of tie-dye and bell bottoms and boots, that kind of thing. So it's not all that different, but boy, it was really different from 3 or 4 years before, where we wore a coat and tie to football games. So, I mean, it's sort of like in a short period of time, the world turned on its axis where, baby boomers were concerned who happened to be in college. That was a market that none of the retailers understood. And while we knew that we knew what we were doing, we also knew that the department stores and the other competition did not know what they were doing, because our customers would tell us, wow, this is great. You can't find this, down here at this store, and you can't find it here. You're the only ones who have this. And so all we did is respond to customers. And, if they liked it, we bought some. And, and if they liked it even more, we bought some more, and we branched out from there. So it was very successful. And I opened a store next to the University of Denver. The first store was right next to the University of Colorado. So we knew that business, and it was very highly successful. We doubled in the first year and a half and doubled again in the next 3 years. I ended up designing and opening 7 stores. So it was really highly successful and a lot of fun.
How many years did you have those retail stores for?
About 10 and a half years, something like that. So pretty long time.
And how long you been doing consulting for?
32 years.
So
add that all up, and that's really old. And
so I think that just shows how much experience we have in front of us to go over a subject when it comes down to innovation.
Yeah.
I did have some questions, but prior to that, maybe I want to wrap it up. The kind of for everybody to get to know you guys is more about what is it that you're doing now, from your previous history in employment and work and what you've done. What is it that you're most focused on today?
Oh yeah, well,
about microgiants, for example.
Yeah, sure. And I tried to retire about 3 years ago, and I got bored pretty fast, and so I started looking around. I began to do a little bit more consulting, but more really on the advisory role, and not so really engaged as I was previously. But I still had a lot of time, and I just tried to figure out really where I could contribute. And so, and in talking to a lot of people, including John and some others, I basically decided to try and start this concept where we would use this expertise of all of these folks who've been out in the world and have been successful business people to try and help smaller businesses or those just going into business figure out how to really do it. And it's really simple. I mean, after 5 years, 80% of all new businesses are gone. So there's a huge market there. I call it a market just because out of habit, but I mean, there's a huge problem with small businesses being successful. Mm-hmm. Why can't they be? You've got SBA, and they have a program to help. You've got business schools all over the place. You've got online resources everywhere. And what's going on with this incredible failure rate? So we just thought maybe we could do something about that. And then, of course, the pandemic came along, and that kind of changed things. And that's why we're doing an awful lot of stuff now, online. And recording it, and then we found, and as far as microgiants goes, we found that wow, the audience is a whole lot bigger on YouTube than it is with us sitting down with 6 or 7 people, and so that's sort of like how we got here, sort of after the career. But I just enjoy it a lot.
Another thing I did want to mention is Ron has written a book, Finding Your Crack in the Market, back into 2016. Mm-hmm. And so just kind of wanted to point that out. It's a very useful, I've used that book actually a lot based on the lessons that we got from Microgiants, and very great book. And we might be have to reference back to some of those things that I read from there in the previous in the next to come conversation. But
yeah, if I could, on that book too, it was a terminal change for our company at the time when I read it on behalf of Ron. I thought, well, I'll read it because it's Ron's book. And then I read it and I say, wow, this is you're challenging me on a couple of things. And so we went into the dialogue about the core content of the book. And it is absolutely very, very accurate that if you can find the crack or the niche in your market and you know how to deliver that and to make the best out of it, then definitely that's kind of a success formula.
So segue into that, actually, can
Thank
you
you
tell us
for-
a little more about your current business that you have with the property management?
Yeah, just to back up a little bit on what we're doing today and what's going on. I think part of it is, I think it's about fear. Initially getting into business, Ron, you mentioned that, you had an older mentor and a younger mentor who could come alongside you. And at some point you were given an opportunity to work for somebody else and you made the decision. Well, part of that process is understanding that you could understand the process of going into business. And the fear of doing it was reduced because you kind of had been doing it.
Mhm.
And so a little bit about where I'm at right now is the same thing. How do we take the magic out of doing it? How do we make it less fearful? How do we encourage, build up, edify some of the lessons that we've all learned over the years? And one of those core lessons, and Ron, you mentioned, why does so many businesses fail? I have a suspicion, and I've got no statistics to back this up, but I'm wondering if a lot of the reasons that small businesses fail is because the expectations of the people who are entering is they expect, or they're led to believe, they're going to make $100,000 in 3 months, or they're going to be, the size of Google in 2 years, and really, if you look at the mass of businesses, I would say probably 50% of the businesses out there are just merely surviving. And, so some of them, you've got to come to terms with the fact, is surviving in the business okay? Or do you want to thrive in the business? Or it's okay to fail? So I would say, coming up with a realistic expectation, guys, we believe we've got the marketing information, we've got all of our cost of goods, and we expect to do okay. Let's give it 6 months or a year, but understand that if we fail early, that's okay. We'll go do something else. And this fear of failure is one of the biggest thing that is an impediment. We've got to go and call it early and bail. I've got a couple of businesses that I started and they were looking really good and they flourished for moments, and then they just plain weren't going to make it. So we pulled the plug on it. And I actually, didn't consider it as a failure. I considered it as a successful launch that I got the timing wrong on.
Yeah.
And
It's a kind of a market research in a way. I mean, you test it. We talk about testing with customers all the time, and sort of like, well, sometimes when you've got the concept is well formed and you're ready to go, the best thing to do is, assuming you don't have to invest $1 million in it, if you can get in fairly inexpensively, you go test it and see what the consumers do with it.
And in a sense, I believe that's kind of why we're here today, to talk about some of the experiences you guys had when it came down to innovating or having the ability to pivot based on a stream of customer saying something, like based on intuition, maybe sometimes, of what they're buying, and say, okay, this is something we need to purchase more because that's what the market is telling us we need to buy. And so I don't know if that's kind of essential or kind of coincides with what I was trying to explain with innovation based on your past allows you to do better decisions in the near future with your businesses. And so I did have another quick question, John, if you could tell us more about the current business that you're in. I would love to the audience or
sure.
watching to know what you're doing now, and especially because I believe it has a lot to do with innovation.
So I think part of it is you build on your past. So I was very interested in starting off a small consulting business and growing, and I had experience in building and in building space. So we ended up buying a fairly reasonable sized building and converting it over to a series of offices, similar to an office park or an office community. And in the process of doing that, I thought, well, let's look at what the clients really would like to have. And good internet was one of them, which I'm currently not experiencing. I would love to.
But you're not in your office. Yeah, you're not in your office.
Not in my office, right?
Yeah.
So extremely good internet was essential. And because a lot of people didn't know how to manage the internet, said, okay, we're going to put a managed internet system so that a client would not have to worry about who their ISP is, the provider is. We're just going to make it available and make it and be able to have that as transparent to them. And then some very basic things. We needed a place that was quiet, where people could come in and work unobtrusively without being interrupted. We needed extremely good air conditioning because we're in Redlands and it gets to 105, 110 sometimes. So we need good air conditioning so that they weren't going to be, uncomfortable. Then we needed to have the ability to have them host their guests when they needed us. We need a conference room, speakerphones, video conferencing setup. So what we did is
Cut off for a little bit.
No, yeah,
Speaking of internet,
Yeah.
as
there you
one
go.
price
There we
and
go.
let them just
you cut off for like maybe a few seconds, but it's essentially what recapping was that your office space is pretty much in full service for anybody for small business to work directly in their office or to have guests to come in.
Yeah.
And kind of like a shared
Correct.
space where you get rid of all the headaches of having to get an office space like we did
Yeah.
here. Have a tiny little office space, but it looked like they were treating me. The city was treating me like I was opening up a restaurant or something. So
Yeah, right.
it was pretty intense experience, and you take people away from those intense experiences.
Let me just say that there
So
concerning
part of that is
John's his office space and his business is that he makes it sound like, well, you just build these little offices and put it in, but really there's a whole lot more innovation involved there. He has developed on his own with vendors and suppliers and so forth, but a whole security system with cameras that he can run remotely way before anybody else was doing this stuff on cell phones. I mean, so he's had this running for years, and from a technical standpoint, he was way ahead, and really, I think, saw the vision of where things can go and what's going to happen to the modern office. He just downsized it a lot so that but an individual person can walk in with just their laptop and they can sit down and plug in and be working in 10 minutes. I mean, of course, you've got to rent it and do all of those things just to get the space. But I mean, once you're ready to go, you've got your keys and you open up and you're in. And so and there's secure parking and secure inside. So he's added a lot of things that now you might see in a modern sort of office situation or executive office suites, but you didn't 10 years ago. And John, you've had that building, what, 10, 12 years? How long have you been doing this? So John was way ahead. He does things that are just like crazy.
So I got
for just one quick example, he puts barcodes on all of his equipment, so that he can, if you're standing there looking at the HVAC system, you can just scan it and you've got all of the directions right there on your phones. I mean, nobody was doing that kind of stuff, but John has already done it.
So I guess I have a question when it comes down to this. Today's subject is innovation. So let's, I guess, dive right into what is innovation. Would you consider you guys a Ron? Would you consider yourself an innovator as well as yourself, John? So start with Ron.
Well, yeah, I would. I consider myself really more creative than a business guy, and a lot of people would think that I am a business guy because I do talk about numbers an awful lot. But I really use numbers as a tool to understand whether or not the innovation, creativity, whatever we call that, is really working. That was drummed into me by my mentors. I do have a business degree, so I've learned all the traditional stuff, and so I have that background as well. To read financial statements, understand accounting, and those kinds of issues, sure, and it was always useful. But I became successful in the retail business strictly because this is fashion now, strictly because of innovation. It was our stores led wherever we went in all of these areas in our niche, and our niche was really that 18 to 24 year old student Could be a high school student, could be a college student, but I mean, that was a very narrow niche, and we simply grabbed the whole market. And we did that because we were constantly pushing vendors to bring us products that would work better, including doing design work for some of our vendors. And we developed several styles that became international bestsellers. And for a time, we were able to get exclusives that made us different and unique. Now, from a business standpoint, well, that kind of makes some sense. But over many years of looking back at it, that's where the whole book on finding a crack in the market came from. Is because we were successful because there was a crack to fill, not that we were brilliant business people. And I think the issue here is that a lot of great businesses start because you do have innovative ideas that serve a functional market purpose. Somebody wants to buy it. And so there's the connection with business. The innovation and creativity is a big, huge subject, but but literally our business was about innovation, including the development of the stores, et cetera.
And John, I do have I guess a good question for you, especially because your business is it requires a lot of technology. In my opinion, it requires a lot of innovation. But can you help us define the difference between innovation, invention, and creativity? Is there even a difference between all those?
Yeah, I think there are. I think they're very nuanced, and I've got to go back to a very simple thing that happened, and you maybe I can turn the question around for you. Age 5, I'm age 5, and for whatever reason, where I lived, they had a lot of ground outside, and I used to love to make mud pies. And so I was making mud pies by getting a spoon from the house, and I remember this really quite vividly, and doing it. And then I discovered that my mother had a beater for making flour, and it was a mechanical device you put your hand on, and I looked at it, and I snuck in the kitchen, and I grabbed a bowl, and I grabbed the beater, and I went out and I put dirt and water in it, and I started creating mud from this beater. Now, I got punished for doing that.
Yeah.
But to me, I still remember it's completely logical. And I can wash it off. There's no harm. Now, was that creative? Was that innovative? What was that?
Yeah.
Because I think this is, when you really get down to it, I think a curious mind going, I'm dealing with this, could I do it differently? And you're not trying to be anything except you're just trying to make a better way. And you're looking at what's going on, and you do. So a curious mind is very, very necessary. Open to change, open to try something different, and open to failure. If it doesn't work, I got caught on that one because my mother didn't want me to use her tools.
From a creative perspective, really, really creative people are happy to fail because now they get to think of something new. It's like, no problem. We'll try it this way, try it this way, try it this way. So that, in a way, the people who don't get discouraged are perhaps very creative because it's like there's always another idea.
And so I guess this is kind of like an observation. Is most people that I talk to is like, oh, I thought of that a long time ago. But it's like acting on it's typically where.
Did you try it?
And so I believe, I don't know if you could help me narrow this down, is innovation is those that not only had the inventive idea and the creativity to think of something, but went through with it to try to figure out a way how to innovate to make that actual idea become to fruition. Is that a good?
So innovation, it could be incremental. You innovate in a process, and over time, the internet as we know it, as such, or computing as we know it, started in the 1820s when punch cards were used in the weaving process. That's a known fact. And then, you wouldn't think that computing was in the 1820s, but the punch card concept was then used all the way up in the 1900s. And then people changed over from card material to cellulose material. Some people use 35 millimeter film. as their punch card because it was less expensive than the traditional. And each step of the way, people used valve electronic devices. Some people used relays. And then I studied fluidics when I was 23, 24. I thought, well, electronics is no good. Let's study the fluidics, which is hydraulic switching. And people had very large water-based hydraulic switches for computing. It was actually kind of fun, but you realize it was slow. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, innovation is incremental steps. And I think there have been 20,000 people in the process of getting the internet to where it is today. Mm-hmm. So were they inventive? Were they innovators?
Yeah, you might argue.
I think somebody say, I invented
the internet. Yeah, you might argue.
Yeah, for somebody to say, I invented the internet, that's really...
Yeah. I mean, you have to think about it too, though. I mean, the internet wouldn't exist had we not discover, what do you call it? Like just saying cities and globes, transistors and how it can be microchips. And they went into that. And then, because otherwise we would have a network like this using old technology, we would have to pretty much power an entire city just to run basic commands. And so I think that I don't know how far we can trace it, but it does, I believe, like you said, incremental. Somebody else's invention and creativity might be the missing stone for somebody to innovate something bigger for fixing a lot of people's problems, which in turn might be able to be the way to find a niche that needs to be fulfilled based on previous inventions.
Yeah, I think you could argue.
And then creative mind.
Not very many inventions in the world. You know, you could say, well, the wheel was invented. You know, that's not so incremental because it didn't work until somebody figured out how to hook it onto an axle and so forth. You might roll a log, that might have been an incremental step to it. But once you got to that point, getting to a car had 1,000 steps. And, you know, we go through a cart and on through over the millennia. And which one of those were really truly inventions? And you could argue there are a whole bunch of little ones. But really, each one of those is definitely an innovation towards something new.
And so I guess this can probably lead me to something more relatable, trying to figure out a way how to put this in. If I want to be a business owner, how important is innovation for me? Or do I just go out there, do something that I can solve a problem for somebody and do it over and over again and consider that a business? Or do I have to consider innovation? One thing I can say is a lot of people I know started a business is because they were good at one trade, really, really good, and they did it over and over again and made a business out of it, right? Yeah. But often, I don't know, innovation is important to continue growing it into more of a bigger business than just potentially your own job at that point. So is innovation important, I guess, if you just want to start your own business?
So I would say that some of the best businesses around in the last decade have been service businesses, people who run air conditioning companies, people who run plumbing companies, in terms of stable, good income. And really, you don't need a high degree of innovation to run a traditional service business. However, to be excellent in any of those things, I think it does take a degree of innovation to really become above average. You need to incorporate some additional tools to set you up. To find the crack in your market, the niche in your market, you really have to have some innovation to excel in that particular area.
So, Ron, you wrote the book, so what do you have to say when it comes down to using that niche in your market for those that are innovating and trying to find have a business, start a business?
Well, I would say I agree completely with John, and there are a lot of service businesses where if you come with a skill, you could say, I want to be in business. And there are a lot of businesses that start that way, and they don't particularly look any different, to one, say, plumber from the next plumber. But, you still have to differentiate yourself somehow so that you can gain some market share. I mean, that has to be in quality, maybe in the levels of service that you offer, maybe you have a lower price, maybe a better value overall. So something needs to be there to sustain that business. Now, I think it's real possible for somebody with a good reputation who simply is a hard worker and knows how to do whatever their craft, their skill is, just to employ themselves and actually do pretty well. But it's a little scary to think that somebody could come along and just knock you off by duplicating that service again. And therefore, innovation is going to be important to that business at some point in time. Now, you're not going to be a disruptor if you say, I think I'm going to start a plumbing company, unless you come up with something interesting and different. But even in that, we can think of, the clean plumber. What was the name of the plumbing company that they built their whole business by simply saying, we're not going to smell like a sewer gas, and we're going to be clean, and we're going to be tidy. There were a whole lot of women that could relate to that. Yeah. So I mean, there was a differentiator. So you say, well, gee, is that innovation? Yeah. They didn't invent anything. They didn't invent the uniform. They didn't invent maybe the concept of clean yourself up a little bit, but they put it all together, and then they positioned the company as being a little different than everybody else. And if your prices are fairly similar, there are a lot of folks that'll say, I'll take that instead of the smelly plumber. I mean, it's simple, but
So, Ron,
some innovation.
Let's expand that a little bit locally. Speaking about a local business that we've probably all attended to, Eureka Burger. Now, Eureka Burger took a very simple concept of a hamburger and a bar situation, and you think, well, they're just going to be another place to get a hamburger with a beer. But they actually excelled at what they did. And was it the formula of the sauce? Was it the bun? Was it the freshness of the food? Because they were all very good. Was it the selection of the off-the-shelf beers that they had? Possibly. But one of the things they also got right was a friendly, professional experience. And, I've got no interest in Eureka Burger, except to say I watched them start up a very small store here in Redlands, and then they did so well, they duplicated themselves into multiple stores, and they did so without losing their edge, which was a predictable, high-quality user experience and good food. Now, what was creative and what was innovative in doing that?
Well, but I think
they found a crack in the market.
Yeah, I think you can really clearly see that there was innovation in the way that they styled the store, and it was new and different and fresh. The way that they delivered the hamburger was a little bit different. A lot of copiers since then. A lot of people have tried to emulate that and copy it. Combining it with more of a bar look was, it's not as though those concepts had not been done before. But you combine that with a location that makes sense in terms of that's part of the market is the location as well. And the lack of, say, other places to go, and that's part of the market. And voila, add good service and you've got a good business. So yeah, it can happen by just being a little bit innovative and just kind of thinking creatively about how you're going to solve and present things. Now, could somebody move in next door and offer the same thing and take some of their business? Sure. What are the unique things? And one of those things is that when you talk about the delivery of service, the people have to be good, consistent, and the service has to continue to be good along with the quality. And those are not easy to do, and they're difficult to duplicate. So sometimes it's just getting it right all the time.
Do you guys have any on your consultation experience? Specifically, doesn't have to be from there, Ron, but we use a couple of samples. Or do you have any examples that are closer to home to you where innovation made a big changing factor on that business? Do you have any you could share with us?
Yeah. I for many years, 12 or 14 years, I worked for a company that's about as dull as you can imagine. I mean, they repaired very large motors. And you kind of go, gee, what can you do there? And the answer is you can just be a lot better. And so when you can measurably illustrate that your quality is better, then you can gain market share. So in this particular case, this company was doing pretty well. It was, had provided really good livings for the two owners. But they knew that they needed to have a pretty healthy markup in order to make it for whatever reason. They were very smart individuals, and they just and the challenge was you have to sell us at a higher price. So what we were able to do is to identify a quantifiable approach to why this was truly a better product. And the answer was because they had a system that they had used that was different than every other company in the nation, that provided absolute quality in terms of failure. In other words, no failures. So when you can go for many years and have no failures, and you're paying from $10,000 to $50,000 per motor to have these rewired, this now becomes a big deal. So by quantifying that, it became relatively easy from a marketing perspective to say, if you really want the very, very best, you need to use this particular company unless you want failures. And so as a result, over a period of 5 or 6 years, we doubled the size of the business, and they became the #1 motor rewind company in southwestern United States with a national reputation. So they were innovative in one simple way. They wanted to find the best wire that wouldn't fail. They wanted to have the best technicians that were very carefully trained on how to do this exactly the way they wanted it. They had to find the right insulating material, and they had to find ball bearings that would absolutely never fail. You add those 3 or 4 elements together, and you get something extraordinary. And yes, it made a huge difference, and they sold that business for a very nice amount.
Can I ask a question when it comes to the previous question regarding innovation, creativity, and inventive? In that scenario, it'd be safe to say they were really creative with their product and very inventive with their process, but they were having a barrier on how to they were missing the innovation on how to display their inventiveness and creativity. Is that a safe assumption that I can make?
Yeah, you can definitely make that assumption. They were not very great communicators. They were great innovators, but not great communicators. And so while they inherently knew that they had a better product, and when they're talking to a potential buyer, they would walk through the attributes. I mean, they did a fine job at that. But they had a more difficult time having a sort of a third-party recommendation approach to, yes, this is in fact a lot better than what you can get elsewhere. And we had to do that through, sort of formulaic, but, marketing materials. And we had to be in the right place at the right time. We had to have a fabulous website, and we had to do a lot of how-to videos. And we did a whole bunch of stuff pointed at one thing. This is a quality which is above and beyond any other quality that you can buy, period. And once we made that connection, business was really good.
John, I have a question for you when it comes to your business. I guess same question I asked Ron, but in your own business, innovation, with the offices and the share space, and what part was innovation, do you think, the biggest shift on when you basically say, I'm an innovator on my business in this specific reasons? I know Ron talked a lot about your business, but I wanted to hear it from you when it comes to how innovation made a big part of your business and using the technology and things like that.
Well, some of the innovation actually was very self-serving, meaning that as a property owner and as a business owner, I wanted to reduce the failure of the air conditioning systems, the communication systems. I want to reduce the failure of the locking system. So I didn't want to be caught in a situation where something failed and my clients were put in a situation where we didn't deliver the right product. So part of what we wanted to do is figure out a preemptive method of doing maintenance and assessments and organizing our core system so that we would know before things would fail that they need to be done. And some of it is just, we've got 15 UPS systems throughout the building. Some of that means you got to come to terms with the fact that they say 5 years the batteries fail. No, you got to do it every 2 years. So you attune that to whatever is needed. Some of it is putting in a sensing system, and it becomes making the building more of a living organism, so that you can then sense the temperatures in various areas, the supply of the air conditioning. You understand the number of times the doors open and shut. You're actually doing some predictive stuff. So nobody really wants to hear about that. But at the end of the day, if you can do that, then the building itself runs well. It becomes a well-oiled machine, and people go around and lubricate the locks once every 2 months, rather than waiting for them to wear out. So that's part of the innovation. It's just understanding we can develop a system that will predict and prevent common causes of failures. So the product then becomes more highly defined. Edgar, if you like, I've got one example from earlier experience in my electronics world. We worked very closely with an electronics manufacturer, a subcontract manufacturer, and we made product for a portable oxygen bottle company. If you needed to have oxygen, you put your oxygen through your nose and you'd walk around with this device. Well, it had a very mundane electronic control on it, and the rest of it was all manual. But it was prone to failure, and you didn't really know how much oxygen was left in the bottle, and if you changed the elevation, it would change. And so two of us sat down and said, look, why don't we digitize this product? I mean, it seems to me like it's a natural thing to take the manual control off and make one that's competitive. Well, we were already making the whole control. We knew what it cost. So we basically breadboarded together a product and went to the guy and said, look, we can make you an electronic control for the same cost as you're making, but the benefit is, A, none of your competitors have it. B, it automatically adjusts regardless of the humidity or temperature that your client is in, so they get a guaranteed control. And C, it tells you as you're getting low on oxygen, so you actually know very positively. So they went for it. It was back in the day, $100,000 of engineering, and then we got a contract for several $100,000 of these devices. Well, that's still used today. I get a great kick out of it because I see people walking around, and I go over and I see the name cryogenic, and there it is. It's our product. It's gone through a cup, and that was fun. And that was simply seeing an opportunity of converting an analog product to a digital product. And so I guess that's part of what I did in the building. You just simply say, how can we be informed about what needs to be done?
I think the motivation was quite different between those two examples, though. And the motivation, on one hand, in your building was because you love to do it. There's another deeper motivation, and that is it has to do with delivery of service. Nobody sees it or knows it, but you do. But it also allows you to keep your maintenance costs lower and your staff lower. So you're actually creating more margin on the same product. So
absolutely.
And this is one of the things that I think innovation is really so useful for. And that is, if you can increase your revenue with it, great. And if you can lower your expenses, great. But if you can increase your margin, that's the best thing you could possibly do. And the customer may not ever even know that, but that kind of innovation is very valid. It's sort of an operational innovation. The other example.
So as you're saying that, go ahead.
Yeah, and the other example is that.
No, I was going to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
So part of this goes back to the beginning conversation that I had about expectations, short-term expectations or long-term benefits. I think perhaps for me, and I'm pretty sure it's the same for you, Ron, that when we go into business, we look at a long-term exit strategy. We look at a long-term benefit strategy. We're not necessarily wanting the immediate and short-term return. And we understand it's like farming. In fact, I use the analogy of farming quite often, is it takes several seasons sometimes to see the benefit of the work that you've done. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what I think good business is about. Is it's okay to be creative and be innovative, but make sure that we're doing that with a view to long-term having, in the case of the motor company, it's tangible results of longer events between failures.
Yeah.
You want to get your failure analysis to the point so it doesn't fail. You want a product that has a higher quality and a longer life to it.
And in a way,
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's right. That's delayed gratification. And it just so happens that if you take a look at the most successful people in the country in groups, and I hate to do that, but and you take a look at, say, immigrants from Nigeria, happens to be the highest income people in the United States are immigrants from Nigeria. And you kind of go, whoa, that's amazing. Well, part of the success factor, and there's a very interesting book written on these groups in the United States as to why they are successful, and part of it, a big part of it, is delayed gratification. And what you are just speaking of there is to say, well, you have to see it through. You have to be willing to wait a while. You know where it's going to go, what you're going to do, and you have to have the patience to wait until it matures and it happens. I think a lot of business, now we talked about testing on one hand. I think that's a valid way to do things too. But on the other hand, if you feel as though you've got it right, you're just not going to get rich overnight. And there are people who push their businesses too hard. I pushed my business to grow too fast in the retail business. And we put ourselves in a very vulnerable situation during recession because we were pushing too hard to grow too fast. That was just the inexperience of a young man. That's what that was. You know, it could have been in that. I didn't want to be in that business any longer, though. You know, the 15 years I was in that business was plenty long enough, but it taught me some experiences that really are very, very well used to work with other people and help them see shortcomings in their type of business.
And so in this case, I guess, is there any, well, I want to add a little bit to that. When it comes down to the farming analogy, I feel like, before the pandemic, I went all in and I said, okay, I'm going to start my own farm, but I have really no much reserves. So I was hoping I didn't starve by the time my what do you call it? Corn came out, if that's what we were farming.
Yeah.
But, it's that risk that I said, I can't look back anymore and I'm going to commit all in. This was my first time I said, I'm taking off the safety net. I'm jumping off this plane and I have no parachute and I'm going to build it. And hopefully when I land on the floor, my parachute's already finished, and there's reward. Finally, I feel like I have my parachute. I feel like I'm probably 2 inches from the floor, finally about to hit the ground. But it was panicky. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I feel like say, I need to go get a job now. But being an entrepreneur, I believe it does take a little bit of that. Let's take that huge risk of starting your farm and knowing that you're not going to see anything for the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. And along with delayed gratification, it doesn't imply an ignorant delayed gratification.
And I believe that ignorance part, if I would have been 25, it would have been extremely ignorant. But this time I felt more prepared at 20, what was it, like 32 when I started this.
Yeah.
So the difference is at least I knew it was no longer based on self. I didn't want to quit my job to become I knew that I was going to quit my job to help people. And by helping people, I figured a way I was going to find a way to solve a problem. Back when I was younger, I was trying to solve my own problems. I wanted a nicer house. I wanted a nicer car. Right.
That's right.
And I think that's the reason I could never succeeded, is not until I figured I was like, wait a minute, it's not about me. It's about trying to fix a problem someone else. And that's typically how you find the niche, because you're truly trying to fix a issue within a market.
Part of the, I don't want to get off on delayed gratification, really, but part of that issue there is it doesn't mean that you're not doing well enough to fund your business. You need to be able to do that. Somehow you got to fund your business. What it really means is that because you grow and you're doing pretty well, then you decide not to go buy a brand new car. It's like, well, no, I can still, I need to drive places, but I don't have to have a brand new BMW in order to do that. So I'm going to have to delay that desire until, I put our business in a situation, because it's the business has to come first, and the business needs money. It's like a giant I don't know, dragon. It just sucks up money. The faster you grow, the faster it sucks it up.
Well, and then on that note, there have been many years in our businesses over the years where I've had employees who have made much more than I've made because we agreed to pay them according to the wage scale and whatever it was. So we paid them. And that month, there just wasn't enough money in. So guess who didn't get paid?
Yeah.
Now, I made that decision early on that I owned the company. And if I didn't get paid, that's okay. But I owned the company and we employed others. I was going to pay them. And what happened over time is my employees realized over time they became a team and then they became part of the community because they were getting paid even though I wasn't. And so they didn't see me driving up with a brand new car and having a new house. They saw me in there with them, supporting them, even though I wasn't being supported. They knew I owned the company. And later on, when it turned around, all of a sudden money's coming. That was a different thing. They were fine. So I think that's part of, I think, the expectation that you can start a business, and sometimes you're going to start a business, but you might not get paid while the business is in a high growth area. In fact, Ron, you alluded to it, and I've actually cautioned people. Growth over 10, 15% is really getting you into an area in a lot of businesses that you're going to run into trouble, unless you're a software company or somebody who has no material cost of operations. High growth, anything over 20% can be really problematical.
Oh, it absolutely can. Yeah.
And Ron's talking about digital world. Not too long ago, on a video for the Microgiants, we talked about how to start a business in the digital world in 2022 versus in one of the things you said is like you just go digital and don't hire anybody. That's the best way to start a business. Does that still stand true today?
Well, I think the principle is that your biggest problem is managing people. And if you're a problem solver, like John, and you can eliminate the number of people required to be able to maintain his business. And so from an operational perspective, it makes sense. But in places like California and New York, employing people is becoming very, very difficult and very, very expensive, which makes it almost a detriment to have to compete with salaries and benefits, etc. And so if you can figure out how to deliver the same product with fewer people, then where does that money go? That's the margin increase. You see, there's where you're creating value in your company by being innovative and not having to do the same old things everybody else does. Let's go back to the plumber example again. How do you run a company really, really well and not have to have a full-time person answering the phone and scheduling, say, 3 or 4 plumbers? Well, the answer is you buy a piece of technology that's going to help you do that automatically, and you let somebody pick the time that you want them to come over on your cell phone, and you build a system that is actually easier, better to use for a certain set of customers in that particular niche, and then you don't have to hire somebody to sit and do that. And today you can't afford to hire that person anyway, because there aren't enough people who want to do that, and you can't pay them enough to do a really good job. So figure out a way to do it better using a digital way. And that's just one example. There are lots of others.
Any thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, I'm obviously a firm believer in technology. In fact, there were many years, going back 10 years ago, that I thought technology was the answer to the issues of any business. And now I've come to the conclusion that, we've got to satisfy the business ends and means, and technology can be and is a good solution, but you've got to make sure it really well fits the application. And you can get it backwards. You can get upside down with technology so that you become dependent on it and you've lost control of your business. So I'd say, yes, I totally do agree with Ron that any pieces of technology can be very, very assistive and can be extremely beneficial. You got to make sure they work to fit the end, because people will sell you right now all kinds of applications that at the end of the day, they sound good, but they don't really end up running as well as they do. So
yeah, no, that's right. And you have to be just as fastidious about selecting your software and your operational systems as you are with your products.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just assume you can just delegate that to your office assistant or something. No, you have to be integrated with it completely and understand exactly what you're trying to do and how the software in this case is going to be helpful.
And I think I might be able to add a little bit to that. Was one of the innovation parts of our business was to find softwares that already exist, hardware that already was put together, to try to fit it into a restaurant, to use technology to systemize things that they were not doing, whether they didn't hire the person to do the accounting or the internal bookkeeping, or they were short on staff, and so one waiter had to do the job of three or four. So one of the biggest things is we realized there even though there's so much technology for restaurants, there's you still have to be very specific of which of those pieces of technologies you put in which type of restaurants, from quick service restaurants to a full bar restaurant or just a full diner. Like every single one of them had his own technology issues, and if you put the wrong system in the wrong restaurant, you break whatever they already had going on, and it makes it worse instead of better. And it was a good experience to realize, yeah, we have to be very careful, use technology very wisely, and make sure we put the right piece of technology in front of the right business.
And so you are becoming the integrator in this particular case. You're solving the problem. So, I mean, I had just said the business owner needs to do that, but not necessarily. There are people, and think of all of the industries that there are in the niches in the United States, which would be, I don't know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of those. There is a business for every one of those little teeny businesses, and doing nothing but integrating and helping people to fix technical problems. I mean, every single, and it doesn't have to be the computer, type person. It's somebody who just understands a business so well, and they spend the time and effort to be able to find the systems that will help that hardware, software, combinations of process, that sort of thing. And those are all very important, innovative things. You don't have to change the whole world. You can just do a few of these little things and make a difference.
Yeah, and I guess super happy with that business model. I'm enjoying my life finally on that end.
That's good.
And final question. I guess we can wrap up with this, and we can open it up more from the questions I had. But I think we could use bigger, older, more slower companies as an example of in how they can innovate to capture new market. Is how they're doing things can help a smaller business as well. Can we learn from them? So if you're Amazon, for example, it's very big, or Starbucks, for example, these guys move a little bit slower when it comes to innovation, in my assumption, because they're so big. And based on my experience in Wells Fargo, that was kind of one of the things that I felt. They were so big that it took a little bit while for them to innovate and move on a changing market. Can we learn anything from them of what they should be doing to innovate, as well as the little guys? Can we learn anything from that?
Yeah, I've got, for me, one of the quintessential good examples of that is a company in southern Indiana called Hillenbrand Industries. And I became very familiar with them in supplying them electronics products, and then later on design and engineering services. They had this commitment in the hospital industry, where they were working, their main product you'd know would be electronic beds, and they had a very large share of the electronic bed market. But what a lot of people didn't know about them is they have insurance services that go from neonatal, pregnancy, all kinds of insurance services back in that end of it. They have insurance services that take care of cremation and the aging. They own a very large casket manufacturing company, one of the largest manufacturers of caskets in the US. And then they have a lot of birthing beds and fetal warmers. And so what they did
cradle
is
to grave, kind of, right?
That's when you talk to them, that's it, womb to grave.
Wow.
And yes, they do insurance on both ends and in the middle, and they have every piece of equipment that the human being needs to get through it. And you think that's good. Okay. And so I got to know them a little bit. What is quintessential about what they've done is they have annual meetings where they go through the cost of anything major they've got. They got to the point where they use a lot of rivets on their caskets, and they bought rivets from all kinds of people who make rivets. And finally, one day they came up and said, we're using, 300 million rivets, and we've done a cost analysis. We can put in a piece of machinery and we can do this, and we can make our rivets cheaper and more affordable, or we're going to take out our piece of machine. And they did this with every piece of their business.
Yeah.
And they were innovative.
Yeah.
They were one of the first companies where they had electronic suppliers probably supplying them in the vicinity of over $1 million a month. And they used to put in the orders and they'd ship them. So they got smart. They said, hey, we're going to give you a mini warehouse on our land. Now you have an option to set up your own person in that mini warehouse. We'll gate it off. You put the employee in there. We'll give you a contract for a year for all these products. You put all your product in there. You put your employee. They're yours. The moment we buy them from you, they're ours. And here's our price. So they ended up taking the supply side out of their business. They weren't buying it when it was put on the truck in Indianapolis or wherever it was. It was already on their site and they didn't own it. So they got extremely sharp with finance. And so the day they ordered it was the day they used it.
Wow.
And they took this philosophy through every aspect of the building. If you actually do a study of the companies they own and the business they own, these guys are fearful in their business sector. Absolutely incredible.
Mm.
Because they've got this way of looking, and it's never done. There's always something they could do to improve it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a 100-plus-year-old company, German-based engineering guys, and they're still innovating and looking at new ways to do it. Now, that to me is a real American classic.
And there are not that many of them. I was watching a video of Warren Buffett, probably within the last couple of years. And he basically went through and he said, here are the top 30 companies that are on in the world in terms of overall value 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And then here it is today. How many are still there? And there are only two. Two. And his point was the turnover of the highest value companies is completely mobile. It really happens fast. So and then he began to talk about some specific things, but it's like 20 years ago, I mean, there was no Amazon, there weren't any of the the big social media companies they were nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, you've got General Electric, which is a shell of itself, and you've got AT&T, which is a shell of itself, and all of these old traditional companies that do the same old thing over and over again. They're so big they can still maintain their market and have a big market share in their market, but their market hasn't really grown very much. And where they used to have a lot of value because they were making a lot of money, nope, now they're way, way, way down the list. So things do change, and if you the only way that you can stay in business and at the top of your game is to be innovative on a constant basis. Otherwise, your business will just wither on the vine and kind of die.
I heard something from Jordan Peterson that was kind of intriguing when it came down to that specific subject, that when big companies get big enough, the entry level point, typically you need to learn how to follow rules and orders, and that's kind of the personality trait that they expect. But then you have the creatives and the people that are kind of like more against, they have a harder time to follow the rules, and often don't either. They confide to the rules and then they never get to fully flourish with their creative side. But then, and the sad part when he talks about it is like, it's the way that they grew too big, that the people that need is down here, but the rules that they created to keep track and keep order is also the one thing that keeps them from filtering the talent that they need to the top. I didn't explain exactly how you explained it. That was kind of like the subject of it, but I felt that was my life. It's like every big company I had, I was like, okay, this is my ceiling, and if they're not going to let me be creative, I have to leave. And so I only lasted about 5 years per company, mostly because I felt that I grew fairly fast, hit a wall, and I'm like, okay, well, there goes my creative side. Either I follow the rules or stay stuck here for the rest of my life. And so that's why I kept quitting jobs and hoping that I can go up the ladder, but it ended every single time at a very solid build of concrete bunker that I couldn't pass to get to the top of each of these companies without confining to the rules.
And
So
big companies are very good at process, and
yeah,
they need a lot of people who are very good at following process. And that's not the personality type of creatives and innovators. They're not the same people. Now, some of us can have attributes of both, and maybe have the ability to do a certain amount of things for a certain period of time. But like you, I mean, I couldn't follow the rules. I mean, I love making rules. Um, and not from an authoritative perspective, but because I think I'm innovative enough to understand that process is a really important part of business. And I've helped clients set up systems and buy computers and do and design whole systems to run giant amounts of customers and that sort of thing. I've got one client that keeps track of every item that is sold for 35,000 customers that get delivery every single week. So I went out, found that system, customized that system, and helped them grow that system. But don't ask me to sit there and input the data or to take telephone calls all day long. That I wouldn't be there but a few days, because that's not who I am. I have to be looking at, and this is an interesting part. It's almost like another whole show, another program.
yeah,
But that is, who are these people? Are you one, and is your neighbor one, and where are they? Jordan Peterson basically says, "Wow, if you're creative, you're in a world of hurt. You better learn something different than your art or your music.
yeah,
You're gonna starve to death." Well, he says it with a lot more conviction than I did.
yeah,
I mean, he's just like, you have got a problem, and you're going to have to figure out how to cope, because we don't have enough jobs for you.
hmm
Meanwhile, the big company can't figure out how to hire creative people.
yeah.
They can't figure out how to deal with them.
All
So,
right. Well, I that's most of my questions that I had for you guys when it came to innovation. Anything you guys want to add that I might have not missed based on the questions I had? That'd
I
be a
think there
good
needs
time
to
right
be
now.
a carry on at some point where you have a general dialogue on creative opportunities and things that have happened. I think there's a lot of examples we've both got that kind of a bit of fun, and probably a lot of people out there don't understand that what they've been doing has been innovative. It's
hmm
some people are labeled troublesome because they're really got a curious mind. It's like,
yeah.
just do what I told you to do, and I think understanding that mind and appropriately positioning it is important.
Awesome.
I think there's a lot more to the subject, and perhaps we'll have to have a couple follow-on meetings.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I feel like this could segue to a lot of different conversations, and they all could be somehow directed right back to this same
Yeah.
subject. But it was great having this conversation. John Mills, thank you for joining us, as well as Ron Burgess, and
My pleasure.
hopefully we can do some of these more conversations soon.
And thank you very much, Edward, for helping us through it.
No problem. It was a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.